The U.S. says it is staging a diplomatic boycott of the 2022 Winter Olympic Games in Beijing. The decision is in response to alleged human rights abuses in China. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said all athletes who attend the event will have the U.S.'s full support. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes reports.
U.S. athletes will attend the Beijing Games next year. U.S. officials will not. That was the middle ground the White House settled on today in response to a series of human rights abuses, including the persecution of Muslims in Western China and the throttling of democracy in Hong Kong.
This is just sending a message that, given these human rights abuses, we cannot proceed with business as usual.
Chinese officials accused the U.S. of grandstanding and vaguely warned there would be resolute countermeasures. But U.S. lawmakers hailed the move, though some Republicans want to go even further.
No athletes, no administration officials, no corporate sponsors.
I would support the moving of the Olympics.
The announcement came less than 24 hours before President Biden is expected to confront another authoritarian leader, Russian President Vladimir Putin. The two are slated to talk by phone tomorrow about Russia's recent military buildup along the Ukraine border. President Biden will warn Putin that if Russia invades, it could face severe economic pain in the form of crippling global sanctions. The goal?
To make it very, very difficult for Mr. Putin to go ahead and do what people are worried he may do.
There are currently roughly 70,000 Russian troops deployed at Ukraine's border. U.S. intelligence officials say Russia could invade the former Soviet Republic using as many as 175,000 troops as early as January.
Is President Biden prepared to warn that there's the possibility of U.S. military involvement?
I'm not going to get ahead of the president's conversation, but that is not our first objective.
And Nancy joins me now with more from the White House. Hi there, Nancy. So let's start with the news on the Winter Olympics. Why does the Biden administration feel a diplomatic ban is the best way to send a message to China and hold officials accountable?
Hi, Elaine. Well, they say that banning U.S. athletes from going to the Olympics would be unfair, that these athletes deserve the chance to compete after training for years, so they didn't want to take that step. And yet they wanted to send a signal to China and to the rest of the world that the U.S. doesn't approve of the way that China has been conducting itself when it comes to not just human rights abuses, but cyber activity and trade and on and on. And so, they took this step. They aren't outright encouraging other nations to do the same, but they've certainly left a lot of time between now and the Winter Olympics for other countries to get on board.
So how is China responding, Nancy, and could this ban impact relations between the U.S. and China going forward?
Well, relations are pretty strained as it is, but it's hard to see how this would make them any better. We're hearing some saber rattling from Chinese officials who are saying that they are going to retaliate in some unspoken way and accusing the United States of basically saber rattling itself or grandstanding. But the reality is it's hard to see exactly what a countermeasure would be by the Chinese when these games are being held, after all, in China.
Is the White House encouraging any of its allies to boycott the Winter Olympics as well?
Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, was asked specifically whether they were encouraging other allies to do what the U.S. is now doing. And she said, no, every country is free to make its own decision. But there's no question that they realize that, the symbolism here of the world's greatest superpower saying that it's not going to send any U.S. officials at all to something that typically brings the world together, the Olympic Games, is, of course, going to influence U.S. allies around the world. And they, I can tell you that they certainly wouldn't mind if they got some backup here on this initiative.
All right, well, let's talk a bit about Tuesday's video call between President Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin. What can we expect from that meeting?
Well, White House officials say that the president is going to deliver a stern warning to Vladimir Putin that if he proceeds with this buildup of troops along the Ukraine border, and if he takes it a step further and actually invades Ukraine, that Russia will face severe economic pain. Now, what that means exactly is not entirely clear. We assume that it means that there would be a new level of global sanctions that we haven't seen before, aimed at essentially cutting off Russia from the rest of the world. But U.S. officials haven't been quite that explicit, and they haven't said what else the president is willing to do if Russia does actually go ahead and invade Ukraine. Would he, for instance, be willing to send U.S. troops to the Ukraine border as well to get involved? They've been very circumspect about that. In fact, a senior administration official said that to say anything right now about what the U.S. would do militarily would simply be saber-rattling. They want to deliver this message directly to the Russians first.
A high-stakes meeting. All right. Well, before we let you go, Nancy, California Republican Congressman Devin Nunes is retiring. He's served in Congress since 2003. I know you've covered him extensively in your time on Capitol Hill. He chaired the House Intelligence Committee, which investigated Russian interference in the 2016 election. What do you make of his departure, and what impact could it have?
You know, Devin Nunes had one of the most remarkable political evolutions of almost any lawmaker I've covered on Capitol Hill. For years, he was viewed as something of a moderate, a friend to leadership. Famously, he once accused some of his more conservative colleagues of being lemmings with suicide vests strapped to their chests because they wanted to try to shut down the government. He thought that was not a common sense approach to the issues that they had with Democrats. But when President Trump took office, he really moved very quickly to the right. And in fact, by the end of President Trump's term, was viewed as perhaps the president's biggest ally. He also, as chair of the Intelligence Committee, really oversaw a breakdown in the relationship between Democrats and Republicans on what had been a committee that was a model for all the other House committees when it came to the two sides working together to analyze threats to this country. And that was partly because he took some really unorthodox measures to defend President Trump, to get information from the White House that he sometimes withheld from the committee. And so as a result, he saw his influence and stature within the Republican Party writ large start to decline, particularly once President Trump took office. He's from a safe Republican district, so I assume that the seat will remain in Republican hands. But certainly, it was rather fascinating to watch the evolution of this one particular politician over the years.
Yeah, a striking evolution, as you say. Nancy Cordes for us at the White House. Nancy, thanks very much.
You're welcome.